In just 11 minutes, Trump dared Jasmine Crockett to take an IQ test. I'll resign if you win. She didn't flinch. She dropped a chart: sneakers up 38%, baby formula up 42%, and every cent paid by working Americans. Then she looked him dead in the eye. That was your IQ at work, or just another tax on the poor? So what did she reveal next? That made even Trump stop talking. The cameras didn't blink. Not when the doors opened. Not when the air changed. The oversight chamber looked like any other day: mahogany panels, starched flags, water pitchers too clean to touch. But something was off. The silence wasn't quiet. It was loaded. Press rows leaned forward. Laptops paused mid-type. Even the red tally lights on the C-SPAN feed seemed to flicker slower, like they were bracing for something. And then he walked in. Donald Trump, navy suit sharp as a blade lapel pin, glinting under the spotlight. He moved like he owned the carpet beneath his feet, like the seat at the head of the table had always been his, even when it wasn't. Reporters snapped photos without flash. The silence didn't ask him to speak. It let him perform. He didn't look at her. Jasmine Crockett sat across the table, perfectly still, eyes tracking him with the precision of someone who didn't blink often, because she didn't need to. She didn't smile. She didn't twitch. When Trump passed within 5 feet of her seat, he turned slightly as if to glance, then changed his mind. She stood. No microphone. No grand gesture. Just a deliberate rise from her chair spine, unshaken gaze direct. She nodded once, not to greet him, but to mark the start of something. A signal, not a courtesy. And in that moment, the room held its breath, not for Trump, but for what she might say next. Because when Jasmine Crockett stands, it's not to be noticed. It's to make someone finally look. And the next person to flinch wouldn't be her. The chairman hadn't finished his sentence when Trump leaned forward, elbow on wood chin, resting on 2 fingers, like he was already bored of the facts. "How about this?" he said, voice smooth but laced with venom. "Let's make it fun. An IQ test. Right here. You win, I resign." His grin stretched wider than necessary, like a game show host who knew the audience would laugh before the punchline even landed. And they did. Laughter rippled through the chamber like shattered glass, sharp, sudden, meant to wound. 2 Republican aides smirked behind their clipboards. A senator chuckled into his coffee. Someone coughed, not from illness, but from shock that he'd actually said it. The camera operators didn't move, but the lens zoomed instinctively tight on Jasmine Crockett's face, searching for a blink, a flinch, a hint of sweat. Nothing. Jasmine didn't even shift in her seat. Her hands remained folded in front of her, steady, unreadable. Her eyes wide open, laser-focused, locked on Trump like he had just walked into her classroom without doing the reading. She wasn't blinking because she didn't need time to think. The moment Trump dared her, something changed in the air. The crowd had laughed, but Jasmine had calculated. Across the chamber, Lena Hall from NBC typed a single sentence. He just challenged her IQ on live television. And even through the feed delay, millions watching at home leaned forward without knowing why. Something was coming. And it wasn't a test, it was the answer. She didn't blink, didn't laugh, didn't even look at him. Jasmine let the echo of Trump's challenge settle like dust in a courtroom, awkward, empty, and destined to be swept away. For 3 long seconds, she sat still while the room waited for her to bite. But she didn't come to bark. She came to dismantle. Her eyes slid past Trump as if he didn't warrant the time it took to blink. She turned instead to Chairman Beckley, calm as a storm cloud before the first drop. Her voice didn't rise, it sliced. "Let's get back to the real test," she said, "the one people are already paying for. No fury, no sarcasm, just truth sharpened to a whisper that could cut steel." The laughter stopped so fast it sounded like someone pulled the plug. Trump opened his mouth, then thought better of it. He leaned back, but not as a power move. More like retreat. Like the game he started had just turned against him, and the board was already tilting. Somewhere behind the cameras, someone exhaled too loudly. A C-SPAN producer mouthed, "Did you get that?" The red tally lights blinked again, but this time they didn't feel like signals of power. They felt like warning flares. This wasn't going to be a debate. It was going to be a reckoning. And Jasmine Crockett wasn't here to score points. She was here to bring the bill. Because sometimes the smartest person in the room is the one who refuses to play dumb games. She didn't raise her voice. She raised a folder. No flourish, no drama, just a slow, deliberate motion, as if what she held didn't need theatrics. Jasmine opened it with the same stillness she'd used to disarm a room full of cameras minutes earlier. A stack of government data sat in her hands, sterile, cold, impossible to argue with. Congressional Budget Office. 3 years of analysis, 17 pages, all pointing in one direction. The numbers, she said evenly, don't care who's tweeting. She slid one sheet forward and tapped it once. The screen behind her lit up, line graph, bar chart, percentage spike. Words like pass-through rate, import burden, retail inflation blazed across the congressional feed like crime scene labels. Her finger traced the slope of a red arrow rising too fast. When tariffs went up, she said prices didn't stay overseas. They landed here on shelves in gas tanks and grocery carts. Trump shifted in his seat, just slightly, but it was the first time he'd moved without controlling the moment. Jasmine wasn't looking at him anymore. She didn't need to. She was looking directly at the American public now, into every living room, tuned in, every iPad open at a diner counter, every retiree watching C-SPAN with the volume turned high. They told you someone else would pay, she said, but you're holding the receipt. And suddenly the real test wasn't between two names on a microphone. It was between memory and denial, between who got hurt and who still dared to call that strategy. Jasmine didn't point to charts this time. She pulled out a single sheet of thermal paper, curled at the edges, faded yellow with time, but screaming louder than any graph. This, she said, holding it up between two fingers, is the only economic report some people ever get. The camera zoomed in. At the bottom, bold and blocky in black ink, paid by Mrs. Rita Jenkins, age 71, retired. One item circled in red: infant formula, $38.72, up 39% from the year before. She let it hang in the air. A receipt, not a statistic, a life. Trump leaned back with a sigh, so theatrical it could have been written. Inflation happens, he muttered, shrugging, like prices just grew on trees, and hardship was a weather pattern. A few chuckles rippled from his side of the chamber, nervous, unsure. But Jasmine didn't break. She's not raising a child, Jasmine said, her tone now edged like glass. She's raising her grandson, whose mother overdosed last fall, and now she's skipping her own medication to afford the bottle that feeds him. Her voice didn't crack. It didn't need to. Every word dropped like a stone on the polished wood desk. Tell her inflation happens, she added, eyes locked on Trump. Tell her this was just economics being economics. Silence again. But this time it wasn't waiting for Trump. It was listening to her. And that receipt didn't just say $38.72. It screamed you lied. And someone else paid the price. Jasmine didn't raise her voice. She raised the remote. One quiet click, and the monitors behind her flickered from bar graphs to a grainy video clip, archived, time-stamped, undeniable. Trump's voice echoed through the chamber, smoother smugger dressed in the false confidence of a campaign stop. No American pays, he said, smiling to a crowd off-screen. Not a cent. We're taking in billions from them. He winked. Laughter erupted in the old footage like a punchline that aged like milk. But in the present, no one laughed. The screen dimmed slightly as bold red letters bled into the bottom corner, false U.S. Budget Office. The word false pulsed like a warning beacon, as if the lie itself were radioactive. Trump's shifted eyes narrowing just for a moment, like he wasn't sure which staffer had missed that this clip still existed. Jasmine didn't look at him. She looked straight at the camera, straight at the millions watching from home. No American pays, she repeated, slow and deliberate, almost surgical. Tell that to Rita Jenkins. Tell it to the parents skipping dinner to afford shoes. Tell it to the truckers buying cheaper tires that blow out twice as fast. She let it sit. Let the silence stretch until it felt suffocating. Then she leaned forward just an inch and asked softly, but cold enough to chill steel, if no one paid Mr. Trump, why are their receipts rising? No one answered. The silence had turned into testimony, and the lie had finally shown its bill. Jasmine didn't hold up a chart this time. She held up a photograph, creased, worn, folded, too many times to be for show. It was of an old man standing in the frozen aisle of a grocery store, staring into a nearly empty shopping cart, His name was Ernest Jenkins, Army vet, Bronze Star, diabetic. On that day, the cart held only bread, off-brand peanut butter, and 2 boxes of saltines. What was missing, what always used to be there, was insulin. She paused long enough for the image to settle like a bruise. This photo was taken by a store clerk who knew Ernest, she said. He used to buy his insulin here. But after the import taxes kicked in, the cost doubled. His veteran benefits didn't. Her voice didn't break. It cut. So he stood there that day and chose crackers instead of medicine. A whisper moved through the chamber. Not outrage, not disbelief, recognition. Because everyone in the room had seen a cart like that. A parent's, a neighbor's, maybe their own. Jasmine turned the photo toward the cameras. He didn't tweet. He didn't post a video. But someone else did. She clicked once. The screen behind her lit up with a tweet now gone viral. Ernest matters, the cost of being forgotten. Somewhere in the back row, a staffer wiped their eye. Trump folded his arms, eyes narrowed. Jasmine didn't flinch. If your policy is smart, Mr. Trump, she said, why does it keep leaving smart, decent men like Ernest behind? No one answered, but the silence did. He thought his mic was off. He leaned sideways, half-shielded behind a glass of untouched water, and muttered under his breath with that familiar sneer curling his lip. Sad stories, he scoffed. Always the same damn playbook. It wasn't loud. It wasn't meant for the room. But in a hearing wired tighter than a national security briefing, nothing stays private. Lena Hall froze in the press box. Her earpiece picked it up clear as a slap. Her fingers flew across her phone before the echo faded. 30 seconds later, her tweet detonated across the feed. Trump mocks veterans' insulin crisis. Same damn playbook. Mike caught it all. Within minutes, Ernest Matters was trending again, this time alongside He Mocked Him, and Mick was on. Jasmine didn't react immediately. She was still holding Ernest's photo, but now the weight of it had changed. The room shifted, chairs creaked, jaws clenched, pens froze mid-note. She slowly lowered the image, placed it gently on the table, and locked her gaze across the aisle. You think that was a script? She asked, her voice low, dangerous. That wasn't a playbook. That was a man trying not to die in aisle 7. Trump didn't respond. Not because he couldn't, because now everyone else was listening for what she would say next, and what he could no longer afford to. Jasmine stood still, hands flat on the table, voice low enough to make people lean in. She didn't raise it. She didn't need to. The silence around her did all the amplification. When policy breaks bodies, she said slowly, we don't call that strategy. We call that cruelty. The words didn't echo. They landed. Hard, cold, final. Like a verdict read in a courtroom that already knew the truth. Somewhere in the control room, a junior tech flinched. The live stream stuttered. 1 second of static, then blackout. For 2 full seconds, every network feed cut to black. No graphics, no ads, just dead air. And when the screen came back, it wasn't Trump's face that filled it. It was Jasmine's. She hadn't moved. Not a blink, not a twitch. Her eyes locked forward, voice steady as she continued, not to Trump, but to America. You can debate policy, you can debate theory, but you can't debate an empty cart, or a cold medicine bottle, or a grandfather skipping insulin because someone rich thought tariffs were clever. No one dared interrupt, not even him. Trump's arms were crossed now, his face unreadable, but for once his mouth was closed. In a room built for spectacle, she had chosen precision. In a room designed for theater, she'd chosen truth. And with one sentence, she didn't just end the moment. She short-circuited the entire broadcast. If pain doesn't move you, what will she let the silence breathe, let it stretch just long enough to become uncomfortable? Then Jasmine leaned forward, eyes locked not on Trump, but on the truth she was about to drag into the light. Just one question, she said, calm as a closing door. What was the GDP loss after a 50% import surcharge on essential goods? The room didn't move. Neither did Trump, until he smiled. There was no loss, he said with a smug shrug, as if the numbers didn't exist, as if reality could be erased by repetition. A few Republican staffers nodded reflexively. A few Democrats stared daggers. The chairman shifted in his seat, but Jasmine didn't flinch. She already knew the answer. "Slide, please," she said. The screen behind her came alive, not with speculation, not with opinion, but with cold, unforgiving math. A chart from the U.S. Bureau of Economic Analysis blinked into view. The line was bold red and falling. GDP contraction 0.7% in the quarter following the surcharge implementation. Annotated, verified, undeniable. It wasn't just a number, it was a scar across paychecks, pensions, and pocketbooks. Trump didn't look at the slide. He didn't have to, because the entire room did. And for once, his silence wasn't strategy, it was surrender. Jasmine looked back down at her notes, then up at the committee and said flatly, "That's not a theory, that's a receipt." And somewhere in America, a family that couldn't afford groceries just learned they weren't imagining it. They were living in someone else's math. Jasmine reached beneath her binder and pulled out a single white sheet. No markings, no logo, just 5 printed questions in sharp black ink. Since IQ was brought up, she said coolly, "Let's take this seriously." She held the page up like evidence. 5 standard economics and logic questions, taken directly from College Board testing materials. I'll read them aloud. The room tensed. Trump leaned back, arms folded, grinning like this was a stunt he could outplay. He didn't know she wasn't bluffing. The first question was basic supply and demand. He answered too fast, too loud, and got it wrong. A murmur rippled. The second, a price elasticity scenario. Wrong again. The third, a logical deduction problem with 4 variables. He hesitated, squinted, then guessed. Wrong. The fourth he got right. Barely. The fifth, pure math, he passed with the help of a staffer's audible sigh in the back row. 3 wrong. 2 right. America was watching. No one clapped. No one jeered. Even the usual partisans sat frozen, unsure if they were witnessing embarrassment or exposure. The live stream chat exploded. He challenged her to an IQ test and lost in real time. CNN posted a split screen within minutes. On one side, Trump's score. On the other, Jasmine's calm, precise gaze waiting. She didn't smile. She just folded the page and set it aside like a scalpel no longer needed, because the cut had already been made, and no one in the room was pretending it hadn't drawn blood. She let the silence sit like a verdict, heavy, inescapable, earned. Papers rested. Pens stopped moving. Even the camera operators had paused mid-zoom, caught in the weight of what had just unfolded. Jasmine looked directly at Trump, her voice not raised but sharpened to a blade's edge. "You didn't just fail the test, Mr. Trump." She said, "You failed the country quietly, expensively." A ripple ran through the chamber, not noise but a shift in posture. Like gravity had tilted toward her. Trump's jaw twitched, his fingers drummed the edge of his folder, but he said nothing. Not because he couldn't, but because the moment had already moved beyond him. Jasmine didn't look for approval. She didn't need applause. Her victory wasn't loud, it was structural. She turned to the panel, sliding the folded IQ sheet back into her binder, as if sealing the file on a case already closed. The moment felt irreversible, like something had just been reset in front of the entire nation. A new standard, a new weight to every word uttered under oath. No gavel fell yet. It felt like a trial had ended. The story was no longer about who was smarter. It was about who finally asked the questions that cost something to answer. Because what if the real test already graded itself? Jasmine reached for a different file this time. No charts, no receipts, just a photo. Faded, edges worn soft by time and memory. It showed a pair of calloused hands blackened with grease resting on a rusted engine block. "These," she said quietly, "are my father's hands." The room stilled again, but this silence was different. Not fear, not tension, something closer to reverence. He was a mechanic, she continued, 38 years in the same garage. Never took vacations, never missed rent. But in 2019, the price of imported oil and parts spiked quietly like a thief. He skipped buying synthetic oil 1 week so he could afford his prescriptions. Said he'd change it next paycheck. Her voice wavered, but not from weakness. It carried the weight of something long buried. That next paycheck never came. She looked down just once, then back at the chamber. He died from a complication that could have been treated, but he never got the treatment, because a silent tax buried in a product label made him choose between engine oil and heart pills. Trump shifted again, but the air wouldn't move with him. Jasmine didn't cry. She didn't plead. She let the truth do its own grieving. I was raised by those hands, she said, and they never dropped me. But policy did. She didn't ask for sympathy. She asked who else had been forced to make a choice no one should face because of a lie dressed up as leadership. She didn't let the emotion linger. She turned, clicked once, and the screen behind her shifted from memory to math. Let's talk numbers, Jasmine said, her voice hardening into precision. Since the tariff hike, average prescription drug costs rose by 29%. Basic food staples, bread, eggs, rice jumped 35%. And every study agrees that wasn't inflation, that was impact. The chart was brutal in its simplicity. Blue lines for before, red lines for after, and beneath them all in small, merciless text, data verified by the Department of Labor. It wasn't abstract anymore. It was specific, daily, personal. They called it protectionism, she said. They sold it like patriotism. But it wasn't either. She stepped forward, the shadow of the chart looming behind her like a flag no one saluted. It was quiet exploitation, hidden in barcodes, tucked into grocery bags, dressed up in slogans like America first, while America's poorest came last. Her words didn't shout, they accused, and they stuck. Trump sat still, hands clenched beneath the table. He wasn't laughing now. No one was. Jasmine let the numbers breathe, let the facts stain the silence. Then she delivered the line that no chart could carry. You didn't build a wall to keep others out. You built a system to lock everyday people in. And now that cage had a name. It was the price tag on survival. The words hung in the air like smoke from a distant fire. Jasmine stood motionless, but her voice, measured, deliberate, kept cutting through the silence, like a blade finding its mark. You can't claim patriotism, she said, her tone colder, now final, and profit off pain. The sentence didn't echo. It landed. It stayed. Across the aisle, Repish Carson, a longtime Republican, with boots polished to regulation shine, lowered his gaze. He didn't shift, didn't fidget. He simply bowed his head. Not in surrender, but in recognition. Something had shifted, and even those who came prepared to dismiss her could no longer pretend the ground wasn't cracking beneath them. A murmur swept through the chamber like the tremor before thunder. It wasn't outrage. It wasn't applause yet. It was the weight of people realizing they'd heard something too true to ignore. Then one by one they stood. Not all, but enough. A dozen staffers, 2 senators, one former opponent who'd once called her unfit. The sound of hands clapping began slow, hesitant, unsure if it was allowed. Then it grew, not into a celebration, but into a reckoning, a moment where dignity overwhelmed party lines. Jasmine didn't smile. She just nodded once as if to say, that wasn't for me. That was for everyone Ernest left behind. Because pain when ignored becomes policy, and the question she left hanging was sharper than applause. If pain is inherited, who gets to stop the cycle? The applause had barely faded when the first leak hit the wire. A shaky backstage clip, 37 seconds long, grainy but damning, surfaced on a freelance producer's feed. In it, Trump stood behind a curtain adjusting his tie, while a young aide leaned in and whispered, "Don't forget the IQ line. It'll bait her. Crowd loves it." Trump nodded, smiled, repeated it under his breath like a punchline he couldn't wait to deliver. The video ended just as he stepped into the light. Within minutes, it detonated. Twitter and X exploded under the weight of a single trending tag stage trap. The narrative flipped like a switchblade. What had seemed like a spontaneous dare now looked like a setup rehearsed in mirrors. Comments flooded in by the thousands he planned the insult. She still destroyed him unscripted. She brought facts. He brought theater. In the chamber, phones buzzed on silent. Screens lit up behind folders. Eyes darted without turning heads. Trump hadn't seen it yet, but his staff had. One aide paled. Another sent a text with shaking fingers. Jasmine sat still, watching nothing and everything at once. She hadn't moved in minutes, but the narrative was sprinting in her direction. She hadn't just answered his test. She had just exposed his script. And now the only thing left to grade was who still believed him. Lena Hall didn't blink. Within 15 minutes of the clip's explosion online, she was live on NBC's special report. Voice steady, eyes sharp. "We've reviewed the source," she said, holding up a flash drive like it was a warrant. It's real. It came directly from the committee's control feed. No edits, no filters, just a hot mic and a cold plan. The network stamped it with a crimson banner, confirmed authentic. Trump's response came fast, reckless, defensive. Deep fake, he barked to reporters in the hallway. Cheap tech. Total fake. I never said that. But even as the words left his mouth, a second feed surfaced, this one from a side-angle lens inside the press corridor, capturing the same whisper, the same smirk, the same cue before curtain. Staffers stopped defending. Allies stopped retweeting. What began as a flex had become a fracture. The image of the bold, unscripted strongman now flickered like bad stage lighting, exposing more wire than substance. Jasmine said nothing. She didn't need to. The mask had slipped, and beneath it wasn't a strategist. It was a performer caught mid-rehearsal. And for the first time in a long time, no one was buying the act. Jasmine stood, hands resting lightly on the edge of the desk, her gaze sweeping the chamber, not to provoke, not to perform, but to confirm that every ear was still listening. The room was breathless again, not from spectacle, but from exposure. Truth had already detonated. All that remained was the quiet aftershock. She didn't raise her voice. She lowered it just enough to make the silence lean in. You set a trap, she said, each word precise as a scalpel. I brought receipts. America will decide which is real. No crescendo, no gavel, just a sentence so soft it echoed louder than anything that came before it. Trump didn't move. Not a flick. The smile was gone. The arms were folded tighter now, not in arrogance, but in armor. The cameras stayed locked on him, searching for some response, some twitch of control, but the moment had slipped. The audience wasn't watching him anymore. They were watching her, and this time there was no applause. Just the weight of realization settling like dusk after a storm. The game was over. The script was shredded. The performance had ended, but the truth, unpolished and heavy, remained. What happens when the mask falls and no applause follows? By nightfall, the hearing was over, but the country wasn't done listening. Phones lit up like fireflies across time zones, search engines flooded with a single phrase. Jasmine Crockett IQ test. 17 million results in 6 hours, trending on every platform. It wasn't the test they came for, it was the answer they hadn't expected. 2 hashtags began carving their way into political history: the IQ trap and who paid. Cable news anchors dropped their scripts. Pundits who mocked her that morning now paused mid-segment, scrambling to reframe what had just happened. One anchor whispered on air, "That wasn't a hearing, that was a reckoning." TikTok stitched her line. You set a trap. I brought receipts into thousands of videos from truck drivers, nurses, teachers. People who didn't follow politics suddenly couldn't look away. Even late-night hosts couldn't spin it. They didn't try. They just replayed the clip of Trump's face when the GDP chart appeared and let the audience laugh for them. But underneath the viral noise, something quieter moved. Respect, recognition, and for many a sense that someone had finally spoken their pain, without pity, without filter, without fear. This wasn't just a political moment, it was a mirror. And millions were staring back into it, asking the same question. If that was a trap, why did it feel like the truth? She didn't linger. No grand exit, no backward glance at the room she'd just turned inside out. Jasmine walked out of the hearing like someone who knew the storm was behind her, not ahead. The cameras followed, but she didn't look at them. Her eyes were fixed beyond the marble columns, on the crowd pressed behind the barricades, regular people in hoodies and work boots, waiting not for spectacle, but for proof that someone still spoke their language. Flashbulbs popped. Microphones stretched forward like claws. But Jasmine's pace never changed. Then a voice broke through the noise. Not a reporter, not a senator, but a child. A little girl, maybe 9, standing on tiptoe behind the railing. Brown eyes, wide hand, waving through a forest of elbows. "You're my hero," the girl called out, accent soft but sure. Jasmine stopped. Just for a second. She turned, found the girl's gaze, and smiled. Not the kind you give to cameras, but the kind you give to mirrors. Then she nodded once, a silent promise passed between generations who understood what it meant to be underestimated and still show up standing. And in that moment, the testimony wasn't in the chamber anymore. It was on the sidewalk, and that was where it always mattered most. The cameras caught her just before the doors closed. No music, no final pose, just that steady walk and the weight of what had been said. In the control room, no one spoke. The producer simply nodded once and the feed began to fade. But before the screen could darken completely, Jasmine's voice, calm, low, unshaken, cut through one last time, like a note left behind after the storm. "Sometimes the smartest thing," she said, pausing just long enough to make a nation lean forward, "is to remember who you're fighting for." No music, no logos, just silence. Then slowly the screen dimmed to black, like a curtain falling after a verdict, not a performance. And as the last frame dissolved, a single line emerged in stark white letters, pulsing gently like a question too personal to ignore. "What part of this truth stayed with you?" It didn't shout. It didn't beg. It lingered. And somewhere in a kitchen at midnight, a nurse whispered an answer to herself. Somewhere else, a father scrolling alone in the dark exhaled like someone who finally felt seen. Jasmine was gone from the screen, but the story hadn't ended. It had just taken root. And now the echo belonged to everyone watching. Sometimes the smartest move isn't playing the game, it's refusing it and bringing the receipts instead. When he baited her with an IQ test on national television, she didn't shout. She answered with truth, with price tags, with pain, with stories no one could ignore. And in the end, that quiet clarity spoke louder than any performance ever could. What part of that truth made you stop and think, share it because your voice might be the one someone else is waiting to hear? If this story struck a chord, don't just scroll past it. Like, share and subscribe to Hill Insights, where truth isn't shouted, it's proven. Tap the bell because the next silence broken might be yours. What moment made you pause? Tell us in the comments. Your voice isn't just welcome here, it's needed. This dramatized story is inspired by real struggles and real people. All characters and dialogue are fictionalized for commentary and education. It is not intended to defame or mislead, but to inspire reflection and civic awareness. Thanks for watching. Truth isn't over. It's just waiting for someone to hear it.